Okay guys, so the day is finally here when I finally am able to get my hands on Daiwa's best top-of-the-line baitcaster, and that of course is the Steez SV TW. Now this was another Black Friday acquisition, so I was able to save quite a bit of money off of this thing. I believe the total cost after the 20% off was like $440. Still pretty pricey. But before we get into this, I want to thank all the true Daiwa fans who have emailed me and offered up their Steezes for me to test out on my channel. I just want to let everyone know that I didn't take them up on their offers because a lot of their Steezes were not stocked. They've been tuned out. And then a lot of the people, well, I guess the rest of the people who offered up their Steezes, they I guess my time with their reel was going to be limited to maybe like 2 weeks, and then I'd have to send the reel back, and I completely understand. So I did decline on several offers. It's got to have been at least 20 of you guys, so I do appreciate that. But I figured with the reel of this caliber, you know, 2 weeks of making a couple of videos here and there was not going to be enough. I needed several months and several tests for a reel like this. So here we go. Alright, so the box itself, it looks kind of plain. And you got some paperwork. Looks like schematics in Japanese. And here's the reel, wrapped in plastic with its own case. And it also came with, I'm assuming these are real foot protectors. I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm gonna put this off to the side. Okay, so this is kind of like the Shimano Antares that came in its own plastic with its own bag, but it comes in this nice neoprene bag here. It's got the Steez Ultimate Bass Fishing Gears little emblem. But here we go. Okay, so this thing is smaller than I thought it would be. Turning the handle very smooth. I'm gonna let you guys take a good look at this thing. Very lightweight. This is top of the line Daiwa, but we're gonna go into that topic later on in this video. Alright, so I'm gonna study this thing now, take some notes, as I normally do, and I will be right back. Okay guys, so it took quite a few minutes to study all the details of this Steez, and I mounted it on a couple of different rods to see how it palms and how the ergonomics are. And actually that's the first thing we're going to talk about. Now when I first pulled this reel out of the box, I mentioned that it was a lot smaller than I thought it was, but it's actually very deceptive as far as size goes. Now in some angles it does look pretty small, like from the side, maybe from this angle right here, but then there's some angles where it looks pretty big, particularly looking at it from the front. We see the big opening here to accommodate the T-wing, and then particularly when you look at it from the top. Now this is a very odd shaped reel, as it's very slim at the back and then it flares out at the front, and Daiwa says it designed it this way on purpose to aid in ergonomics. So basically they wanted the rear as narrow as possible because they knew the front was going to be very wide to accommodate the T-wing and then that recessed mag force dial. I will say this, it was pretty comfortable on those rods. and I mounted it, I believe, on a TATULA rod and also on a couple of Shimano rods. And it is comfortable, but it's not nearly as comfortable as, let's say, this reel right here, the Shimano ALDEBARAN. As you can see, the big size difference there between the two. Of course, the ALDEBARAN does sit lower on the reel seat. Now let's compare it to a reel that was inspired by the Steez design, and that's the new TATULA frame and body. This is the TATULA Elite. As you can see, they look very, very similar, but it's pretty obvious that the new TATULA body is smaller, and in my opinion, it does palm more comfortably. As you can see there, I believe it may actually even be lower than this Steez as well on the reel seat. But once again, this is the older original design, so of course Daiwa has been perfecting it and refining it to become this. So hopefully the next Steez, when it comes out, will be a smaller design. Now it's not uncomfortable at all to palm, don't get me wrong, but it does feel a little weird having your finger splay out. Now one more reel I'm going to compare it to is a reel that I consider a direct competitor. That's going to be Shimano's new ANTARES A. As you can see, the ANTARES A is noticeably smaller, but it's also noticeably heavier as well. Now since this reel is going on 4 years old, I'm not going to go over every little detail on its specification. That information is readily available to anyone out there, but I'm going to go over the important stuff in my opinion. Now the first thing we're going to talk about is the frame. Now the frame is made of magnesium, then the palm side plate is supposed to be made of Zion, if I'm not mistaken. But there's some kind of confusion on what the handle side plate is made of. Now, Daiwa USA says it's made of magnesium, but when you go to Daiwa Japan's website, they say it's made of aluminum. So I'm not sure who's right, but I'm gonna go with Daiwa Japan since they are the original source. Now let's talk about ball bearings. Now since this is Daiwa's top of the line, low profile baitcaster, this thing is loaded with ball bearings. It's got a total of 13. So that means 12 ball bearings and 1 roller bearing. And you're probably wondering how they fit so many bearings into this reel. And no, they didn't load the knobs up with bearings. Daiwa likes to put a bearing on the end of each side of the worm gear for, I guess, extra smoothness and refinement. But I also suspect that it also looks good on paper to have so many bearings. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is this handle. So I want you guys to take a good look at the handle and try to guess how long you think it is. Does it look like a 90 millimeter or maybe 85 millimeter? It's actually only 80 millimeters long, but it looks much longer than that in my opinion, and that's because Daiwa gave it what they call the skeletal design, where they poured out as much material as possible. So these arms right here are very, very narrow, which gives you the illusion that the handle is longer than it is. So pretty cool trick they did there. Now it doesn't feel that short right now when I'm cranking it, but we'll have to see when I'm out on the water casting lures and retrieving them. So 80 millimeter handle, and let's talk about G1 Duralumin. It's something that they emphasized on their website in Japan was the fact that they used G1 Duralumin not only for the spool material but for the main gear, which is supposed to be significantly larger than the old Steez, but I think they kept the same weight as the old Steez because the G1 Duralumin is supposed to be lighter yet stronger than standard Super Duralumin. Now currently the Steez comes in 3 different gear ratios, and they are all color coded. Remember, Daiwa was the original company that I remember to start color coding the gear ratios, but they don't color code the whole reel, they just color code the accents. Now there's a 6.3:1 where the accents like this little band around here, and the nut retainer is gold. And then there's the 7.1:1, which is what I have. As you can see, the color accent is red. And then they have an 8.1:1 where the accents are purple. But the 8.1:1 is going to have a longer handle at 90mm, and it's going to have a shallower spool, which they call the 1012 spool. Now that model was actually available on Tackle Warehouse, and I was very close to purchasing that one instead, but I bought the 7.1:1 for a specific reason. But yeah, if you're looking at the 8.1:1, there are some differences between that model and these others. Alright, so let's talk about the Drag Star. And this is the first of 2 big disappointments that I found on the Steez. Now, of course, it clicks. Very precise clicks there. But the material is probably, it looks like it's just made of graphite. It doesn't say anywhere about Zion, and it's definitely not made of metal. Now, I wish it was made of metal. I'm sure they made it graphite to save, you know, some weight, but, you know, I'll take a couple of tenths of a gram weight gain to get a metal drag star. I will say that it is very intricately designed. You can see the star arms, or there's a design in there, and the base of the drag star, as you can see, has got some material removed to save weight, no doubt. But yeah, it's not even made of Zion, and that's a huge disappointment on a $550 reel. And let's talk about the zero adjuster. Now, this was the first Daiwa reel to incorporate the zero adjuster, and just in case you didn't know, these are preset from the factory. They don't want you to mess with it, and that gives you what Daiwa considers the optimal spool tension for performance. Now, it's kind of plain. Wish they would have gave it some kind of a color accent, but let's see if there's any kind of side-to-side movement. And actually there's none. There's no side-to-side movement. Let's see what the brakes are on. Okay. I mean, it seemed to spin okay, so that's promising. I mean, it's not the longest free spool, but let's compare this to the zero adjuster of some other reels. So here's the TATULA Elite Long Cast. I haven't touched this since I got the reel, but there is a small bit of side-to-side wiggle, and it's probably not going to come through in the camera, but I can definitely feel it. I can feel the spool clacking. It's probably like a 1/4 of a millimeter. And here's the TATULA 100. This has a lot of side-to-side movement. I don't know if you guys can see that. I can definitely feel it clacking. It's probably like 1/2 a millimeter. So I'm wondering if Daiwa sets the zero adjuster specifically for each reel and how much side-to-side movement it's going to have, or if that's just, you know, quality control issues. But either way, I am not touching the zero adjuster on this Steez because I'm sure Daiwa knows what they're doing. Alright, so now it's time to get to the nitty-gritty, and that means popping the scale out, and we're going to get a weight on this spool, and then we're going to see what that spool rotor looks like. Okay, so I got my scale out, and there's actually some conflicting information on the internet about the weight of the Steez. Now, some sites say it's 5.5 ounces, while some say it's 5.7. Now, either way, that's a lightweight, but let's see what the scale says. 5.7. So, still a very, very lightweight. And I believe the original Steez, when it came out, was probably the lightest reel in the world for a time there. But since then, the world has caught up and surpassed Daiwa in that respect, with reels like the ALDEBARAN 30, which comes in at 4.8 ounces. But when you compare it to its more natural rival, the new ANTARES, the Steez is a feather. 7.8 ounces for the ANTARES, so the Steez is actually a whopping 2 ounces lighter than that ANTARES, and it shows. So before we pop the spool out, let's talk about the brake adjustment real quick. Now, fortunately, Daiwa went with what I like to call the T3 style side plate and brake adjustment. And that means that the lower half of the MagForce brake dial is covered up by the side plate. And that is a welcome change, especially if you're working something like a jerkbait, where you cannot feel the teeth of the MagForce dial poking into your finger. So that is a welcome change. Now, of course, it does make for a wider front part of the reel, but I'll take that trade-off. This is definitely a reel you can use for working jerkbaits because it's so light. And it's also quite ergonomic for making quick adjustments. So let's say you got your Steez and you need to make a quick adjustment, let's say one click. You just reach your thumb over and that's it. You don't have to flip it over to the side unless you just want to pick a specific number, but it's very ergonomic for quick adjustments. So going into this purchase, I already knew two things. I knew that the spool on the Steez was supposed to be super lightweight. I'm not sure how light. And also that the spool is an SV spool, so it has the air brake design, which is, I don't think is conducive to long distance casting. But let's pop this spool out, and you do that by flipping this latch. I don't think it rotates. Yeah, it pulls off to the side. But let's take a look at this. So immediately I see something that makes me think that this is going to be a much better caster than the TATULA, which is the only other Daiwa SV reel that I have, and I'll talk about that in a second. Here's your brake assembly, and let's pull this spool out. Alright, so it feels super light in hand, and you can see it employs the short spool shaft. Now it's 34 millimeters, and you can see the writing. It says, what does that say, 1016 SVG1 and some other writing. But yeah, I immediately notice one thing, and I'm gonna have to pull out the TATULA SV spool to show you guys. Okay, so I got the spool of the TATULA SV out, and let me show you what I saw. And that is the significantly smaller size of the Steez rotor, thank God. It's probably almost 2 millimeters shorter than the overbraked TATULA SV. And not only that, hopefully you guys can see, but the actual rotor itself, the metal is thinner on the Steez versus the TATULA. So in case you didn't know, the TATULA SV, in my opinion, is not a particularly great caster. It's very, I guess, tame versus my other reels. But yeah, that is very promising for the Steez. Let's check one thing real quick. Yep, it's got the air brake. Okay, so let's get a weight on this thing. Now in hand, it feels way lighter than the TATULA spool. Of course, it's got the short spool shaft, but the TATULA spool weighs in at 13.87. It's almost 13.9 grams. while the Steez is only 11.5 grams. Yep, 11.5 grams. And that's with a spool bearing on it. And one thing about Daiwa spool bearings is they are generally a lot heavier than spool bearings from competing manufacturers. So I actually want to take that spool bearing off and get the true weight. Okay guys, so despite Daiwa's claims that G1 Duralumin is supposed to be stronger than regular Duralumin, I found that the G1 aluminum damages really easy. I've damaged the spool on my SS Air as well as an Alpha's Air. So I'm taking no chances with this Steez, and I've put a triple layer of tape around the rim. Now of course the damage was only cosmetic, but when you're kind of OCD, you don't like that kind of stuff. So let's see if I can get this spool bearing off. Okay, so we have success getting the pin off. Alright, let's pull this tape off. Okay, finally. So I'm going to pull this spool bearing off. And it doesn't come off quite easy. Okay, there we go. So let's take a closer look at this bearing real quick. And hopefully you can see that it's actually a bearing that Daiwa has put inside a bigger metal casing. So I guess this might be their version of like a silent tune to keep the bearing from moving around during the cast. But yeah, this is apparently why Daiwa spool bearings are heavier, but yeah, almost 2.5 grams. But let's get to the nitty gritty. Now this spool feels like a feather right now without that bearing. 9 grams. Let's weigh that again. Basically a 9-gram spool. So this spool is definitely going to be bait finesse capable. So the casting range on this spool must be huge. Now to put into context, I believe the lightest spooled Shimano I have that's not a bait finesse reel is something like 11 grams. And that's in like the ALDEBARAN or maybe even the ANTARES A, but this is a whopping 2 grams lighter than those competing spools. So that's pretty amazing. Now, I knew the spool was light, but I didn't know it was this light. Now, in case you were wondering what SV stands for, I've explained this in several other videos, but basically it stands for stress-free versatile, and all SV spools have the air brake or the twisting rotor. So this rotor extends out in a twisting motion, and the spring on the rotor is definitely a lot weaker than on, let's say, a standard MagForce Z rotor. So this braking system will extend into its maximum braking sooner and stay in its maximum braking longer throughout the entire cast. And even when you're doing low speed casting like pitching or whatnot, the brake will pop out into its maximum position, giving you more control. But with that comes a decrease in distance. But hopefully, since this rotor is a more standard style rotor and the spool is so light, that this Steez should be a great dynamic caster. Okay, so in this final section of the video, we're going to talk about why it took me so long to get the Steez and why did I go ahead and decide to get it now. And that's pretty simple. Now, the first reason is that I pretty much bought all the top of the line Shimanos that I wanted. So, you know, I figured I'd give Daiwa's top of the line a chance. And the main reason why I didn't get it in the first place is because I didn't think this reel was worth the money they were wanting for it. And I'm going to bring out this reel to prove that point. It's the Shimano Antares DC. Now, the Shimano Antares DC is Shimano's top of the top of the top of the line. I know they have a bunch of expensive reels, but this is their cream of the crop. And because of that, Shimano put every single bit of their best technology into this reel and really spared nothing. So you got your most advanced, sophisticated brakes on the planet, the 4x8 DC brakes. You got your MGL spool. You got your first level micro module gears that are so smooth, it doesn't even feel like it has gear teeth. You got your X-Ship, your S3D spool machining, your silent tune, your magnesium frame, etc. So everything Shimano had at the time, they threw into the Antares DC. Now with the Steez, this is supposed to be Daiwa's top of the line low profile baitcaster, but they didn't give this reel all their best technology. Now, there is a braking system that's available still in Japan called the MagForce 3D, where you have 3 main adjustments that you can do, and I'm going to put up a picture for all you guys who are not familiar with this brake system. You got your long cast, your all-around mode, and then your max brake mode. Now you can pick between those 3 settings, and then of course you can fine-tune with the external dial. And I actually had the original T3, and I love that braking system. And that braking system is still available in Japan in Daiwa's Z 2020 reel. Now why didn't they put that in the Steez? There's clearly enough room in this really wide frame to fit that mechanism in there. And in fact, when the leaks of the Steez first came out several years ago, I was pretty sure they were going to give that braking system to the Steez because of the T3 style side plate, but they did not. Okay, so let's get to reason number 2. The Steez is not known for being the best at anything. Now with the Antares DC, this is known for being the longest casting low profile bait caster on the market right now. Shimano's proven it with video evidence. But what is the Steez known for? Now, I don't even think it's his longest casting reel in Daiwa's own lineup. I think there are a couple of reels that are reported to cast better. And if you read any reviews on this reel, and I should rephrase that, if you read any credible reviews on this reel, no one ever says, wow, they are just amazed by the super long casting of this reel. And it's not even, the lightest reel on the market. It doesn't even have that going for it. As you can see, there are several reels out there now that are significantly lighter than the Steez. Now, one thing that people like to say is that this reel is incredibly refined. And while it is smooth and it is solid, I guess refinement is pretty much subjective to the user. It's not as smooth as a Shimano that has the first level of micro gears. So yeah, that's why I have not purchased the Steez until now. But I can tell you this, if you are looking for aftermarket support, there is no better reel than the Steez. This thing has aftermarket parts out the yin yang. You probably have at least a dozen or more aftermarket spool options. You have several handle and knob options, star drag options. The sky's the limit for this reel. This is probably the reel that has the most aftermarket support in the world. Now I will admit that as expensive as the Steez is, the Antares DC is significantly more expensive, and the price difference between them, you can probably pick yourself up a different spool to make this reel perform better. I will tell you, the spools for the Steez are not cheap. They cost more than, a lot of your average workhorse baitcasters. And I may or may not have bought a finesse spool for this already. So be on the lookout for that if I did or did not get one. Alright, so basically, there we go. Got myself a Daiwa'S Steez. Couple of disappointing things about it, like the mushy thumb bar and graphite drag star, but I'm not gonna let that deter me. I'm gonna string this up with line and I'm gonna go out and cast this thing and see what it's all about. And then of course I'm going to put this reel through the ringer, and it's gonna go head to head in several tests against Shimano's best. So be on the lookout for that. Alright guys, thanks a lot.